is an Unspoiled Network podcast.
This is Spoil Me, covering Hounded, Book 1 in the Iron Druid series. I think it's Iron Druid Chronicles by Kevin Hearn. Chapters 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, and 10. In these chapters, a whole lot happens. This is a very fast-moving story, and it was so much fun to read. Thank you very much, Aaron, for commissioning this. Welcome to Spoil Me. All right, welcome everybody. I am Natasha, and I am covering a story that spins wildly out of control very quickly, and it is a lot of fun. I think those can be my favorite kind of stories when, just something goes wrong and it sends everything else into complete chaos. So the last 5 chapters, we met Atticus and got a sense of who he was and what had happened to him to cause him to live as long as he had, and who the different gods are that interact with him the most, and the way that the mythologies of different belief systems work in terms of manifesting and all of this stuff. And we also meet his dog Oberon. These next 5 chapters, we get a lot more action. So Oberon goes, I really enjoy this a lot. Oberon, first of all, is the real MVP. He's super fun. Yeah, Aaron's saying best character in the series. I would believe it. Oberon feels like he's got more personality than I would have expected in terms of he isn't just blindly faithful. He's obviously very loyal. Don't get me wrong. But he gives him shit every now and then. And also I find it fascinating that Atticus feeds his dog the same things that he makes for himself for breakfast and dinner. They go out and have fish and chips, him and his lawyer, and he gets fish and chips for Oberon as well and gets him a beer, which for some reason that tickled me. But I'm getting ahead of myself. So chapter 6 begins with a hunting party. And Atticus doesn't really think this one through entirely. He can shapeshift, and he transforms himself into a wolfhound for this hunting trip that he's taking with Oberon and Flittish. And it turns out, as we find out later, that Flittish can take control of animals in general. So when he transforms into this wolfhound, she has control over him and infuses him with this hunger and bloodlust that is not his own. But he isn't aware that's what's influencing him. That all he can tell is that this isn't right. I don't feel like myself. And he thinks back later to how he should have just transformed right back and been like, what are you doing, lady? But instead he brushes it off because he's eager to get on his way. And he heads out with Oberon, which there's something so special about the idea of a dog owner getting to transform into essentially a dog to pal up with his dog buddy, and them getting to be on equal footing. I feel like Oberon needs to be able to turn into a human being at some point in order to equal this out. But he is chasing some, I think it's bighorn sheep that are wild in this park into an area where Oberon can take them out. And so they're working together in this hunting scene. And he's chasing them and is, noticing that they aren't really as afraid of him as he thought they would be. And they get to a spot where there is a kind of clearing, and Flittish is there, but she gets interrupted by a park ranger, and this bitch can't handle not getting her way. So this guy tries to stop them and barely gets a word out. And she throws a knife at him, lodges it in his shoulder, and then tells Atticus and Oberyn to finish him off. And Atticus realizes just in time that he's not in control and transforms back into himself. But poor Oberyn is completely taken over and kills the park ranger. And it's really heartbreaking later because he feels so guilty about it. And it's like, not only does he feel sick and throws up, but he's super worried that Atticus is mad at him and like keeps asking him. And Atticus has to reassure him a bunch of times that I don't blame you. She just used you as a weapon the same way that she would use a knife or a bow. This is not on you. But it takes a while, I think, for Oberyn to really believe him. And I'm not sure that he does really in the end. So that was really sad. And this park ranger being killed, he has this earring that has some energy to it. And so they're feeling like there was something a little bit magical to this guy. But when Flittish feels the magic on it, she can tell its origin, and it leads Atticus to believe that this guy was sent here by Angusog, that he was probably cloaked so that he was able to sneak up on them because they didn't see him coming, which is not, it doesn't make any sense. And that he wasn't even aware of what he was doing necessarily. So essentially, this park ranger's free will was taken away. And Atticus just has a big problem with that, understandably. It like flips him out, you know? And this guy ends up dead and they have to cover the body, but the cops are already on their way because this was a setup. So Angus probably figured out a way to tip them off that something was going on. So Flittish is able to use her power to bury the body, but only buries it a few feet below the ground. And it's like very obvious that this is an area that's been dug up. So once the cops get there, it's not going to take them hardly any time to discover where the body is buried. So they have to bounce out of there. She uses some her power to cloak them in invisibility, and they get gone really quick. I really like the detail that Oberyn is like fighting with her horses that draw the chariot that they came in, because he keeps on talking about how he would rip their throats out if he were by himself and if they weren't protected by the goddess. And they're like, yeah, we don't need the goddess's protection. There's no way that you could handle ripping our throats out. Sweet, sweet little summer child. They call him a runt and he gets so mad. So once they get back after this whole thing has gone down, the horses are saying to him like, oh, what happened? You seem upset. Were you a bad dog? And there's something so like, it's super funny, but also messed up considering what did actually just happen. So, Oberyn, I'm sorry, buddy. You have my sympathy on that one. And Flittish herself is like very irritated that Angusog interrupted her hunting a brand new species that she's never hunted before. That's the first time that she's done something that's new to her in like thousands of years, it sounds like, at least hundreds of years. And so the fact that he interfered with it, she takes that personally. So that's going to be a thing. But yeah, the way this whole thing goes is just, like I said, it's before you even know what's happening. And this is, I just feel really bad for this park ranger. This guy didn't want this. He wasn't interested. He wasn't like, in other words, Angusog sent fairies after Atticus in the beginning. Those are dudes who like signed up for this, you know? And even though they aren't quite aware of what Atticus points out to them, which is you guys are being used as pawns, he is sending you hoping that you're all going to die, because if you do, that means that it's really me. They maybe don't know entirely what they've signed up for, but they're aware of the risks to a degree. This guy is just some rando, you know? I felt bad for him. So the next day, he's like really concerned about figuring out how to cover up that whatever blood and scent is still on Oberyn, because he's worried that there may be canine DNA left in the wounds of the park ranger and that they are going to be able to track down the dog that did it and put him down. Which is like, I was bitten by a dog a little like less than a year ago at this point. And I don't know what happened to the dog, but it was like reported to police because it was a big thing outside somebody's house. And, they came and interviewed me and asked me what address the person lived at and what the dog looked like. Like, I think the dog might have been put down, which is one of those things that, like, I know that it's a smart idea and that dogs, if a dog jumped over a fence and bit me, it could have gone after a child and literally killed the child. So, okay. But I also feel like so guilty about it, even though I did not fuck with that dog. I did not bring it upon myself. It jumped a chain link fence and came after me for no reason. So yeah, this whole thing with him, like, being worried that Oberon's going to be put down is a very real thing. And he winds up, cloaking him in like this camouflage spell for the rest of this day. And then when he talks to his lawyer later, his lawyer's like, yeah, maybe you should just keep that up for like a good month or so until people forget that you had this dog, and then tell them that you can't find him, but you're going to get a new dog, and then you can take the cloak off, and by then everybody will just think it's another dog. Which is pretty involved, but I just don't like, for me, my initial reaction was nobody's going to come after you, dude. But then I kept remembering that Angus is like trying to set him up. So there's absolutely no guarantee that they're not going to come after him. So when he washes Oberon, he tells him about Genghis Khan and like riding with him and what he was like. And Oberon gets really into the idea of becoming the canine version of Genghis Khan. And I like this part. It says, it was an amusing habit of his. Oberon had in the past wanted to be Vlad the Impaler, Joan of Arc, Bertrand Russell, and any other historical figure I had recently told him about while he was getting a thorough cleaning. His Liberace period had been particularly good for my soul. You haven't lived until you've seen an Irish wolfhound parading around in rhinestone-studded gold lame. Excuse me? What did he have that was gold lame that this dog wore? There's not nearly enough detail there. Was it pants? Was it a vest? A fetching little vest? Was it a shirt? Was it, I want much more detail on that, please. There may be some fan art out there of this and I want to see it. So get on that, Aaron. So I strode out to my backyard barefoot and towed Oberon to go into sentinel mode. I watered my herb garden from right to left, and he talks about all of this stuff, and then he goes and he gets this sword out of hiding. It is really interesting the way that this is done, because this is the sword. What is it called? The Answerer? Something like this. And it normally gives off this really intense aura of magic, but in order to hide it, he had to dampen that aura. So he got in touch with a witch, and she put this like cloak on it, essentially. And it doesn't seem like anything but an ordinary sword. And he says, the cloak was a spell far beyond my abilities. Those kinds of spells are not in the druidic milieu. A friendly local witch named Radomila had cast it for me, and in return I had hopped a plane to San Francisco, driven up to Mendocino, and shape-shifted into a sea otter. This allowed me to retrieve an ornate golden necklace set with several large rubies, which were clutched in the hand of a buried skeleton she had stunningly accurate information on. She seemed mightily pleased to receive it, but even with 2 millennia of arcane knowledge in my head, I had no idea what it signified. That's witches for you. I love that whole thing. Like, one of the big things that we get revealed to us in these 5 chapters is his interaction with witches and their relationship with each other and his feelings about them. And we'll get to what happens with that, but it was very entertaining. So yeah, he says even though Fraggle Rock is one of the most powerful magical items ever created, it should be practically humming with Fey energies, but it just lay there in front of me like a stage prop. I knew the cloak worked on the Tuatha De Danann too, because Flittish obviously had been unable to sense it during her visit. So that's pretty cool. Also, there are bindings on it to keep him from opening it. And he says this was my most vulnerable time when he has it sitting out in front of him, but not yet unwrapped. Because while the sword's location was now revealed, there were 3 bindings and a cloak on the sword to prevent anyone, including me, from using it. The bindings were my own work, and it's pretty much all a druid can do. We bind elements together or unbind them. When I shapeshift, I'm binding my spirit to an animal's form. Summoning mist or wind, that's a form of binding too, as is camouflaging myself or allowing Oberyn to hear my thoughts. It is all possible because we are already bound with the natural world by living in it. We could not bind anything if the strings connecting us to all of nature were not already there. And because we see these connections and know that seemingly disparate elements can in fact be closely related, druids have a better grasp of divination than most other magical practitioners. Our knowledge of nature makes us superior brewers of medicines, poisons, and even potables. We're able to run tirelessly by drawing on the power of the earth, and we heal fairly quickly. We're useful to have around. But we don't shoot balls of fire out of our hands, or fly upon brooms, or make people's heads explode. That sort of magic is only possible through a radically different view of the world, and by binding one's spirit to extremely unsavory beings. So, I had been thinking about, obviously I keep drawing comparisons from this series to Dresden Files because of the tone and personalities of their main characters. And when he mentions we don't shoot fireballs out of our hands, I had to think of Dresden. And that was something that gave me a little bit of pause, because it's really like Dresden can do hand-to-hand combat. He's not great at it. He carries a gun, so if his magic doesn't work out, he's got a backup weapon. But mostly he does rely upon magic in fights. And he isn't able to heal himself. So we have Atticus, who can heal, and it's not an instant thing. Although it did sort of seem like it was instant in the first chapter, I have to admit. I guess he just sort of binds it up, but it's not entirely healed. It's just, begun, well on its way. But all of the fighting that he does is like, it's indirect. So he's not making a direct attack with fire, but later on we see him use the earth to hold beings in place. So he's got, while he doesn't have certain magics that Dresden has, in a lot of ways it seems like he's got more going for him in the magical power department. So he says the bindings on Fraggle Rock were simple but effective. One kept the oilskin sealed, one kept the sword in its scabbard, yet another prevented it from leaving the confines of my backyard. All of these could be undone with a bit of my blood and spit. Fluids I don't give out for free. So that's what he's got done. He undoes it so that he can carry this thing around with him, because he's pretty much going to make himself a target and try and draw Angus Og out at this point, because he's over it. He's tired of this bullshit. I really do delight in the fact that the cloak wouldn't come off without a generous donation of my tears. This is the cloak that keeps the energy that the sword gives off from being detectable. Those used to be almost impossible for me to summon, I admit, until I watched Field of Dreams. When Kevin Costner asks his dad at the end if he'd like to have a catch, I just completely lose my shit. Any guy who doesn't is either in mixed company when he sees it, or was blessed with an unusually sensitive father. I blubber and sob like a jilted girl every time I watch that scene, or even when I think about it. My dad would never have played catch with me. Never mind that he's been dead for more than 2,000 years and baseball hadn't been invented then. My dad's idea of bonding was throwing me into the tar pits to teach me a lesson, though I'm not sure what the lesson was, except to stay the hell away from Dad. I really enjoy that. So he goes to the shop, and there's a guy that works for him, Perry, I believe his name is. And he cloaks Oberyn and has him come along. So none of the customers are going to be able to see him, but he wants to have him by his side for protection because Oberyn is badass. And he passes by the widow MacDonagh on his way in and promises her that he will come by later, and she turns out to be hilarious. So we will get to her. This whole morning routine thing was full of weird little surprises, because it turns out that his place is a kind of like a morning hangout, because he offers teas and stuff like that he makes there, which was really surprising. I thought that this was all stuff that people buy and take out, but he makes them, and there are tables, and even has like some little bits of like, muffins and things like that, I think he mentions. So yeah, all like this was just made me reevaluate what the shop looks like in my head, because I had sort of an image of it as being a straight up apothecary new age shop. But now it's got a vaguely coffee shop feel. Not really, because it's not that deep, but a little bit. And he gets pretty busy, and they're both very distracted, him and Perry. And then in comes Hawk, Halborn Hawk. He used the name Hal for modern American usage. Who has the paper and is like, do you know anything about this? And points out a headline, Ranger found dead in Papago Park. Casting off my American accent, I replied in kind, I'd be knowing more than is comfortable just between me and my attorney-client privilege. I love this. Like, this, he says, I thought so because I heard Coyote laughing last night, and he doesn't laugh at the harmless, does he now? Oh, Coyote. That's a fun detail. I'd forgot that Atticus notices Coyote laughing after the park ranger dies. Coyote, you a little fucked up, buddy. Just a tad. You're a little bit malicious, ain't you? So Hawk is like, all right, you know what? We really need to do lunch and like talk about what's going on here, because obviously you need a little help. So they agree that they're going to meet up later and have lunch together. So he talks about the different teas that he offers, and that there's one that like makes the elderly feel a lot younger for several hours in a row, and that they'll come and have it every morning. And then he gets a surprise customer. This was delightful to me, because this bitch is not some Stevie Nicks black dress wearing, crystal hanging around her neck, having, crunchy hippie / goth type at all. She's wearing shit that I want flat out. Just, I want to wear. I'm going to read this. So, first of all, his defenses go up as soon as he realizes that she's a witch, and he mutters a binding under his breath to keep all his hairs on his body, because witches could do some pretty heinous stuff with hair, blood, or even nail clippings, and I didn't know yet if she was friendly or not. So he talks about she had her brown hair pulled back in a ponytail, as carefully considered a decision as the makeup applied to her face and the pink gloss on her lips. She was wearing a white BB tank top and a pair of oversized white-rimmed sunglasses. She carried a pink cell phone in one hand, along with a jangling keyring. Her tan, silky legs were bare beyond a pair of turquoise cotton shorts that strained at the boundaries of modesty. Her feet were slipped into a pair of pink flip-flops, her toenails painted pink with golden glitter sparkling in it. This bitch is just like Rodeo Drive kind of like casual brunch wear sort of outfit. Like, just, it's casual in quotes, but clearly every detail is attended to, which is what I strive for. And it's a bunch of pink and turquoise, which are like my two favorite colors, which if anybody's watching this video, you can pretty much tell just by looking at the background of this room. And I was so delighted for this to be a witch, for this woman who is, if she met a lot of people from the New Age community that I knew growing up when my mother was really into paganism and goddess worship and doing drum circles and stuff. And if she had told them that she was a witch looking like this, they would never have believed her, taken her seriously. And it reminds me a little bit, I don't know if anybody has seen this, but recently Sephora came out with an advertisement about how they're going to be releasing starter kits for witches at Sephora. Okay. And it's going to contain like a deck of tarot cards and a crystal and a bundle of sage incense and like some essential oils or something, some scents. And everybody is making fun of the fact that Sephora is offering this, which I don't blame them. Like, I would make fun of it too. But then they're talking about all these basic bitches that are going to be pretending to be witches. And I am just picturing this woman, you know, she's like, it makes me so delighted. And he talks later about how she probably is like 90 years old and withered up and whatever, but she manages to keep up this appearance of looking really young, around 21. So that's a really fun detail. And she knows who he is by name and tells him that she is part of the coven that I think Rodomila runs, which makes him relax a little bit because he trusts her, and tells him that she needs a tea that will make her unattractive to a man. So he's like, you mean like an anti-Viagra? And she says, yep. And he's like, okay, but you and Rodomila are both witches who could definitely make this tea. Why are you coming to me? And all she says essentially is that, yeah, we could, but we really don't want to. To which he's like, oh, okay, if it's like that, yeah, I'll do it, but you better pay me a lot, because obviously the reason you don't want to is because it's super dangerous. So you better be ready to like compensate me for taking on that risk. And I wasn't expecting, but he asks her for 10 grand for this tea, and she wants it to last for several days. So it, you know, it's a tea. It doesn't stay in your system. So she's going to have to come in every morning and drink it every morning at the same time. And so I like all of the details here. I like, one, that she has to come in multiple times to drink it because that forces them to interact a few more times after having a really bad experience. And I really like the fact that he outright asks for what he even kind of admits is a rather exorbitant fee. And the fact that she bristles at it, thinking that because she's got Rodomila's note, which has her blood on it as like her signature of approval that this woman's doing this with her blessing, that's going to cover it and she won't have to pay for it at all. So the fact that she has to pay right off the bat, she's like, what? But then kind of recovers herself until he tells her how much, and then she gets really upset. And I really like this detail too. He says something like, Rodomila was pretty powerful, and I would rather not get on her bad side. Oh, one-on-one, I'd probably be able to dispatch her. But then her entire coven would come after me together, and they would chew me up and tell the Morrigan to go suck on it, because they most likely had their own goddess in their corner. Love this. Love this detail. Like, I'm really curious what their goddess is in their corner, because my mother, I don't think that she would call herself a witch, but there was a time when she may have, and the Morrigan was like her jam at that time. But obviously, like, there are all different, like, paganism and Wiccanism can be very flexible in some ways, so you can sort of mix and match and pick what you want. Which I won't get into the like appropriation that Wiccanism can really be guilty of, but it's certainly an issue. So yes, he tells her 10 grand. And finally she agrees to pay it and asks if she comes back today, the same day, with the check, will he let her start right away with this tea? And he also lays out some really firm rules about this. You will appear here tomorrow at this hour to drink a tea I will prepare for you, and every day thereafter for a week. Failure to appear will void our contract with no monies refunded. Tomorrow you will bring me a cashier's check for $10,000. If the Tempted Coven is unwilling to take care of your paramour's libido on its own, which they could do far more simply than I, then I am owed danger pay. So finally, she says, once begun, you will not renege. And he's a little startled that she just flat out asks that. And we find out later why she clarifies that point. You have my word, Emily, that once payment is received, I shall execute the contract as stated, so long as you appear daily at the same hour to drink my tea. She spat in her hand and extended it to me. Contract offered? I stared at her hand and made no move to take it. If I spat in mine and shook her hand, then she would have some of my spittle to work with. Giving a witch your bodily fluids is akin to slicing off a choice cut of your buttocks and offering it to a werewolf. So he does not shake her hand, and she seems triumphant. She's not offended. She's like, oh, good. You know that I could fuck you up. And also purposefully says, bye, puppy, on her way out the door to let him know that he saw through the camouflage on Oberyn. So he starts making the tea and talks about what its effects will be, which will basically be to make her stink really badly and just be unappealing, and mentions how he sold it to sorority girls as humility. They use it on their exes or their stalkers, or sometimes to end a relationship when they had no good reason to do so. Spoiler alert, you can, when I always get bristly about the idea when they have no good reason. Any reason, if you don't want to be with somebody, that's a good reason right there. But whatever, it's fine. And he talks about how the mystery behind why some of the things that he makes works has been taken out since science has come into play, and he's learned more about the pharmaceutical reactions that certain plants and just ingredients have on things. And even though it takes the mystery out, that he's sort of proud of the fact that he's able to make things that are so effective that even the pharmaceutical industry hadn't even caught up with him at one time. So he's working on that, and then he takes his lunch break and goes to the fish and chips place with Oberyn. And there is this woman who works there, Granwale? I'm trying to figure out how you would pronounce her name. Graneuaile. It's probably not pronounced the letters probably make a totally different sound than they do in English. He says that he knows she's not entirely human. Aaron's saying Granuaile. That's a terrible name. Granuaile. It's it's a tiny shift of pronunciation away from granule. So yeah, so he says, her scent was my only clue. She was a mystery to me, and a beautiful one at that. Long locks of curly red hair cascaded over her shoulders. She has green eyes, really pale skin, and she wears a t-shirt that's tight, but not super revealing. So, being a barmaid, she's not really trying to show off anything in order to get tips. And he can tell that she's not one of the Fae, that she's not undead, that she's not aware of something. He thought maybe she was a witch, but her aura doesn't seem quite right from that. And then he says, if she had been anything sent from hell, I would have smelled the brimstone. I'm like, oh, okay. But instead she gave off an ineffable scent that was not quite floral, more like a Pinot Grigio mixed in with something that reminded me of India, like saffron and poppies. I was left to conclude that she was a goddess of some sort, masking her true nature and slumming here incognito, like so many other members of the supernatural community. So he is determined to figure out what she really is without actually asking her outright. Like, it's a little bit of a game that he's playing with himself. And also, he is super into her, and she flirts with him a lot, and he almost loses his head immediately. This guy is so easy. I enjoy Oberyn giving him shit about this a lot. And even Hawk is like, or Hal, as he goes by his first name usually, I guess, in this chapter. He's like, dude, hey, you're paying me $350 an hour. Maybe we should get to work here. But yeah, it's pretty great. I enjoy how like stupid he gets right away over this chick. So they have a chat about what was going on with the park ranger and how best to protect Oberyn. And he mentions Leaf, who is the vampire, and asks Hal to send Leaf over to his house. And he says, will you be paying the firm for his time, or will he? He was referring to the business arrangement I had with the vampire. Leaf and I had a unique understanding. Sometimes I paid cash for his services, and sometimes I paid him in fine liqueur, that is to say, my blood. I had carefully neglected to mention that to Flittish. The blood of a 2,100-year-old human, and a druid no less, was a powerful, intoxicating, and extremely rare vintage for a vampire. I slashed my arm, drained a wine glass full for him, and then healed myself, and that was worth 12 hours billing to him. Then I washed out the glass, make sure he hadn't spilled any because I was paranoid about my blood getting into the hands of witches. He paid the firm out of his own pocket for such a drink, and he had grown powerful over the years by it. I never saw him use the power because nothing locally wanted to mess with him, but I think Leaf was trying to become strong enough to mess with Thor someday. Ooh, I'm totally here for a vampire Thor fight. That's so weird. So then he starts talking about the furbolgs. And he says, to you, they'll look like a biker gang of something similar, but they will smell like shit. The point is, you won't be able to see what they're really like because they wear glamour when they walk in the mortal world. In truth, they're giants with bad oral hygiene and a predilection for wielding spears. So they're basically the muscle that he believes Angus Og is going to be using. And he even says that he's not particularly worried about the fight. Like, he's sure that he's going to be able to take care of them, but it's more the collateral damage that may bring police into it. And that's the point, right? Angus is trying to fuck Atticus's life up and draw as much attention from the mortal police as possible. So sending over a bunch of people to pick a fight loudly and in public is the ideal way to start some shit. So let me move on here because a lot of this conversation that they have is what I'd already talked about protecting Oberyn. And he gives him advice, like, if you don't want to lie and pretend that Oberyn died and keep him cloaked, you can tell them that assessing his DNA is against your religion. And even though that will not hold up in court, it will delay things enough for you to hide him somewhere. So I don't think he's going to take that route, but it is a pretty funny idea. And this is, he heads back and meets up with Emily, who has the check for him. And he makes a show of like triple and quadruple checking it to make sure it's real in order to piss her off, which frankly is hilarious to me. There's not really a good reason for the two of them to be so antagonistic towards each other right away. It's just this attitude they each have that gets under the other's skin. And I really love the fact that he's going out of his way to make her irritated. And then she is clearly planning this whole thing in order to push his buttons in the end. So she drinks the tea really quickly and then says, "Now, Druid, that you have entered into a contract from which you cannot withdraw without severe consequences, I have the pleasure of informing you that the man you're rendering impotent with this brew is none other than Angus Og." And that's the end of chapter 8. In chapter 9, he's like, yeah, that's a pretty good bomb to drop, but I'm going to try my best to not show any reaction on my face, because that's clearly what she wants, and I'm not going to give this bitch the satisfaction. So, rendering Angus Og impotent, the god of love, allegedly, is a real problem. Like, this is going to be something that Angus is going to need to come after him for personally. No more sending his lackeys. So, for some reason, this is something that, like, they're eager to set him up for. And I say they, even though I don't believe that Radomila knows about exactly what Emily's goal is here, but I'm not positive. It seems like Emily just doesn't like him and wants to fuck with him, but I can't tell why, because they have never met before, as far as he said. So he decides that he's just gonna, like, not only not give her the satisfaction, but insult her. He says, "So you've come to me to make him wilt like lettuce? You could have just done the job yourself by shedding that skin and showing him what you really look like." And even as he says it, he's like, "I can't believe I just said that." And she moves to slap him. And then we get a little story about his friend who was slapped by a witch and how she used her nails, got some of his skin under them, and then used them for a spell later and made his heart explode in his chest. So essentially, a slap from a witch is as good as a death sentence. And he treats it as such. And decks her. So yeah, he breaks her nose, I'm pretty sure. I knocked her arm down by crossing my right hand over my face, then backhanded her really hard, much harder than I should have. I shouldn't have hit her at all. I should have just backed up out of her reach, but I tend to flare up when people try to kill me, which is what she was trying to do, make no mistake. So yeah, he breaks her nose and she bleeds onto the floor. And finally, he's like, "Listen, you came after me. I have a security camera here that will back me up on that. And you were the one who offered violence to me. This was self-defense, and this is my shop. And I would just advise you to not try and use magic against me in here either. Because, as I said, this is my shop, and there's all kinds of wards set about around this." So she goes out to her car, and he uses a spoon to scoop up the blood off the floor that she left there. And he heads out after her and stands in that patch of grass in front of his shop and holds up the spoon, and she knows immediately what it means, that is her blood in that spoon. And she tries to cast a spell to knock the spoon out of his hand with wind. But just as she does it, he does some spell and licks her blood off the spoon, which, ew, gross, but okay. And when the wind heads toward him, he just feels a little buffet, and she, inside her car, gets thrown forward against the steering wheel and honks the horn, because what he did was bound her to him so that any spell that she tries to cast on him will affect her instead. So when she sent that wind towards him, she was not only trying to knock the spoon out of his hand, she was trying to knock him off the grass, which is his source of power. And it shoved her into the steering wheel, which is hilarious. I love this whole scene, and I don't really even have anything against her, even though she does seem like super shady. I kind of like that she's super shady. I want to know what her deal is. But I just love how quickly they go after each other and how it ratchets up with such new information about how magic works here, So this is the first time we've seen these kinds of specific attacks, you know? So I just found this really fascinating and funny as well. There was something sort of cinematic in my head about a lot of it. So then he goes back to working in his shop as he always does. And he gets a call from Melina Sokolowski. May I speak to you about what occurred between you and Emily this afternoon? Do you consider the contract between you and Emily to still be in effect? And he says, oh yeah, nothing happened to nullify that. She asks if he's okay with her coming along tomorrow when Emily has her tea again. And he's like, no, that's fine. She says, my intention is to defend Emily in case you attack her again. And he's like, according to Emily, how many times have I attacked her so far? Once physically and once magically. Well, at least she got that part right. But in both cases, it was she who initiated the attack. And she says it's her word against yours. And he says yes, but he had the security camera, so that's not entirely true. The camera may not show what happened outside on the street, but it'll at least show what happened in the shop. So he should just show Melina that. I don't know why it's brought up, and then he doesn't even, mention that to her. And he says, you must understand, she told me her lover is a sworn enemy of mine. By doing so, she has allied your entire coven with him. No, that's unthinkable, Melina objected. If we were allied with this individual, then we would not be trying to humiliate him. Why are you trying to humiliate him? That is a question better answered by Radomila. So put her on, is she there? Radomila is indisposed. So he doesn't get this information, but I really want to know. What the hell, Radomila? What are you doing? And then there's a weird thing about a guy who wants to know if he sells medical marijuana. I had a problem with this bit. The greasy man asked me if I had access to medical marijuana as an apothecary, and I pasted a sorrowful expression on my face and told him no as I rang up the incense he needed to mask the stink of his habit. Drug addicts perplex me. Now listen, maybe this guy does other drugs, but I really hesitate to call somebody who smokes weed a drug addict. I don't even smoke weed. This isn't me being defensive at all. I've tried a couple times and it just did not work for me. But it's just not really the same thing. And he goes on this tangent about drug addicts and how people are using it to fill a space that used to be there that used to be filled when we were more connected to the land. And it was just a lot of what felt like proselytizing on the part of the author, and also a weird tangent to go on when somebody asks for weed. That's just not, to me, part. And also the idea that he's a druid and he doesn't smoke any weed is just a little bit outside of what I'm willing to believe. But, all right, you know what? You do you. So they head back and he stops in to deal with the Widow McDonagh. And there is somebody coming at them in armor. This was a hell of a thing. He's wearing armor that's so over the top and gaudy that it's just not something anybody would ever have worn into battle, the whole thing. And it's also super hot, so he can't be comfortable. And he hails Atticus over, and Atticus calls him Bress. I feel like we've seen this name before. But Bress is obviously not a good person, or god, or fairy, whatever. He uses a glamour to keep himself looking like he's just talking to Atticus, while really he's raising his sword, he's raising his sword, planning to slice Atticus in half. Luckily for Atticus, he has a charm on him that keeps him from being blinded by this glamour, and he sees double and sees the glamour version of Bress and sees the real version and can see that this dude is lifting his sword. In order to catch Bress off guard, he pretends that he can't see it. And Bress takes a swing at him. Atticus steps neatly out of the way, has Oberyn step up behind Bress, knocks Oberyn over onto his back and also, like, disarms him. And then he cuts his fucking head off. Meanwhile, the widow is standing right there and is like, you just killed him. Do you know what resolves this whole thing? He tells her, first of all, that he was an old enemy of my father's, that this sword that I used was his, and my father, like, took it back to where it belonged, and you know about my Irish family, and this guy was English. And she's like, oh, really? English? Well, if you need some space in my backyard, you can bury him back there. Oh my God. I love it. I love it so much. God damn the queen and all her hellish minions. And he's like, thank you. I will bury him in your backyard. Also, do you have some lemonade or something? This is so funny. So she goes and makes lemonade while he drags the body in back. And I was waiting. I was like, all right, so the Morrigan's going to have to show up, right? Yep, she sure does. And she is not happy. She's like, I didn't give you permission to kill one of them. And he says, I don't need permission to defend myself. He was going to fucking kill me using a glamour. And she's like, you would have survived that though. And I had forgotten about that. So when she mentioned that, I was like, oh shit, that's true, huh? And he says, but in what condition? Forgive me if I do not wish to experiment with various levels of pain and disembowelment. Okay. So when she said you would have survived, my immediate reaction was, oh shit, she's right. What did you just do? But then when he points out that he doesn't know exactly how he would have survived, like the details of that, I was like, yeah, that feels like something you maybe should have worked out with her. You know, like, what? Figure out what that means to say that she will remain in ignorance of him and his mortality. So he tells her everything that happens, and she says that was unforgivably arrogant of him. He deserved to die a fool's death. And look at that horrendous armor. And then says when Bridget hears of this, she will want me to bring her your head. Don't you know what the position you've put me in? And he advises her to tell Bridget how fucking idiotic this guy was, how over the top and arrogant, and that Bridget probably will not want restitution because he was so ridiculous. And Morrigan seems mollified by that. I think that she sort of agrees with him. So he's in the middle of washing the blood out of the street. And I love this. She gives him, the widow comes out and gives him the lemonade. She swayed a bit as she searched for the door handle. You're a good lad, Atticus, mowing me lawn and killing what Brits come around. Oh, God, she is funny. So, and I love Oberyn. You know, I think the television might have desensitized her to violence. So, chapter 10, the Furbolgs. They are coming, and they are loud, and they are very large, much larger than they look to the average person. And these motherfuckers apparently are not ready for this guy. And they're certainly not ready for Leif, who is sitting in his house with his vampire tummy rumbling, waiting because he hasn't eaten breakfast. This guy rolls on out of there and jumps on the first guy and takes him down and is super excited about it because this is very rare blood. And he's like, oh, nice. Thanks, Atticus, as he goes out there. And they weren't ready for a vampire. So then we get like this whole fight sequence with Atticus bringing using the earth to like lock them in place. And there is a really horrible moment. Where's the part that I'm trying to find? Because he's talking about the tattoo that winds like all the way around his body that helps him, so that not only is he like using the strength of the earth and the power of the earth, but he doesn't get tired either, which is a pretty big deal as long as he's barefoot, which, to be fair, that's a pretty large setback that you can't wear boots or anything. His feet must be like gnarly, right? Having to be barefoot so much of the time. Here's the part. So I pointed my finger at the furbolg to set foot on my lawn and said, I'm not even going to try and say that. Literally, hold or detain. And the earth moved to do my will. It gave way and then reformed around the furbolg's feet, rooting him abruptly and very firmly to the spot. To say he was surprised would be putting it mildly. With so much forward momentum, his bones had no choice but to break above the ankle when his feet were suddenly and inflexibly held in place. The bones ripped out through the back of his calf, and he flopped face down in front of me, sans feet and screaming. That was not the way I had envisioned things working out. I had hoped he would brace himself, keep his feet, and serve as a wall between me and the fellows behind him. No such luck. His buddies kept coming enraged rather than cautioned by their comrades' fall, and now I had to deal with 3 spears thrusting at my vitals. That is so brutal, guys. He locks his feet in place, and it causes his bones to break and jut out oh, that's so horrifying. That was really rough. Like, I was reading this last night, and I was sitting next to Owen, and I read that part, and I just went, oh! And Owen was like, what? I read it to him. He was like, Jesus Christ. So then we get more of the fight, and he gets hit by a couple of spears and, like, you know, starts to sort of try and clean himself, but he can't, or heal himself. And poor Oberyn is like really doing his best, but their skin is very tough and he just isn't able to get through it. So basically Oberyn is like distracting them, which is not nothing, but it puts him in danger. So eventually Atticus has to step in to save him. And in the end, they all are taken out. So this whole fight scene, like, this was really fun, and I really enjoy Leaf, like, just being totally down to do this. And he one of the moments I like the best, and this is actually highlighted on the Kindle, it'll tell you, you know, this line had so many highlights if it's something that a lot of people have highlighted. I cast camouflage on myself and my sword, and then I crept up behind the 2 immobilized furbolgs and stabbed Fraggle Rock up into their kidneys. And this is the part that's highlighted. Cowardly? Bleh. Tell you what, let's debate the meaning of honor and see who lives longer. Which, fair. Frankly, I'm fine with it. I always get really infuriated when there's like a main character who's like, his back was turned and he was running away and I couldn't. Oh God, come on. And I know like there are certain characters where that is just true and it's going to be part of who they are and that's fine, but I still get super frustrated with it. And then he's like, once it's time for cleanup, he's like, I can't ask the earth to swallow these. I had asked so much of it already. And besides that, I doubted there would be time. I wasn't as fast as Flittish when it came to moving large amounts of earth. And I imagined someone had called the police by now. As if on cue, I heard sirens in the night air, and that drew my gaze to the parted living room blinds of my neighbor across the street, whose large round eyes were staring fearfully at me as if I was somehow the bad guy. Great. So Leaf, he like manages to like knock him out of his stupor because he's really, really into this. And he's like, hey, maybe you can help me out here because there's an awful lot of evidence sitting on my fucking front lawn and the police are headed this way and we can hear them. And Leaf runs upstairs, gets change of clothes for him because they're both covered in blood. And he uses his magic to drag a bunch of the bodies in back and pile them up. Leaf has to get the ones that are in the street, and he has to go run across and use his mind mojo on the neighbor to get him to forget everything. And he has to use camouflage to keep the cops from seeing all of the pools of blood, which I'm really interested. We don't actually I don't think see the interview in this chapter, right? But if the police don't see it, that doesn't mean that it's not there. So if they walk through it and then they get in their car, they're going to leave bloody footprints and they're going to have to notice something is going on. But yeah, so I started casting camouflage on every spot of blood I could find, and then on the piles of bodies as well. And I was fairly confident I had taken care of all visible evidence before the first patrol car rounded the corner. If they went snooping around the east side of my lawn, they would run into some major invisible evidence, but hopefully they would never have reason to do that. 3 black and whites pulled up to my house, alerting all my other neighbors that the noise they had been ignoring was something to worry about after all. 6 officers jumped out of the cars and pointed guns at us over their car doors. "Freeze!" one of them shouted, even though we were standing perfectly still. Another one snarled, "Hands above your head!" and another one said, "Drop the sword." Now that's interesting because I think he mentions casting camouflage on the sword. I'm trying to find the exact moment. Oh, here it is. Yeah. The power stored in my bear charm would drain quickly if I tried to handle them alone. But what I could do was cast camouflage on all the bodies and the spreading pools of blood. Oh, and maybe I should conceal my sword, too. He says maybe I should, but we don't ever hear him actually do that. So the fact that he's still got his sword out is bad news. That's a problem. I imagine that there's probably still blood on it. Even if there's not, I'm just curious how this is going to go. And like I said, there are 6 cops that show up. So if they go tromping around, there's no way they aren't all going to miss the pools of blood magically walking through them. I wonder if the camouflage can work on them after they leave the premises. I imagine he can only cast spells that last while they're in his presence, right? Yeah, a lot of questions about this, but the cops should not be able to see the sword. Oh, interesting. So so you're saying that even though it wasn't specifically mentioned, he probably did conceal the sword. And for whatever reason, it just didn't work. Okay. I thought maybe it was that he thought to himself that I probably should, and then he forgot. Okay. Interesting. I wonder what that's about. It feels again like Angus Og is setting some stuff up, but I don't know how he can manage to, unless there's something about the blood of the dudes that he killed that affected it in some way. There's a reason, but spoilers. Yes, don't tell me, Aaron. I'm asking all these questions purely hypothetically, but don't answer any of them. Is there anything, Aaron, that you want me to talk about before I wrap this one up? Because basically I've talked about everything I think I wanted to for this section. But yeah, this was a lot of fun. And I'm really digging this book so far. It's very weird, in terms of the mishmashing of different mythologies and magic types and abilities and magical creatures and modern, set in the modern world, but with lots of holdovers from the ancient world, including actual people who are holdovers. Just a real interesting little mishmash is the word I want, I think. All right, guys. Well, let's see. Oh, he's asking, what did you think about the first paragraph of the book, the bit about witnessing the birth of genius? Yeah, I actually meant to bring that up when we first started this. Oh man, I closed my Kindle. I'm trying, because I was really... Oh, you found it hilarious. That was not the word I was going to use, but let me go back and find the very first, let's see, chapter 1. There are many perks for living for 21 centuries, and foremost among them is bearing witness to the rare birth of genius. It invariably goes like this. Someone shrugs off the weight of his cultural traditions, ignores the baleful stares of authority, and does something his countrymen think to be completely batshit insane. Of those, Galileo was my personal favorite. Van Gogh comes in second, but he really was batshit insane. Oh, yes. Okay. I had forgotten that last line, but that's pretty good. And then thank the goddess I don't look like a guy who met Galileo. So it's a real, like, I think what I wanted to bring up about this opening paragraph is what a weird introduction that is. Because he talks about bearing witness to the rare birth of genius, which you think is going to like come up later, but it doesn't really. Like he's just using that as a, like, for instance, with having lived this long, which is sort of weird. But yeah, Van Gogh really was batshit insane. At least, yeah. I'm sure living that long, you see some crazy that is just in its own echelon of crazy. People used to burn weird people at the stake. Now they just moved to the suburbs to avoid them. Yes, I forgot about that part too. Yeah, that's true. And it does seem like a lot of weirdos tend to either move all the way out to the country and be completely alone, or they tend to be in the cities to be near each other. It depends on the kind of weirdo you are. I'm more of a city weirdo, but I really am not too much of a weirdo. I'm kind of basic in a lot of ways, to be perfectly honest. So suburbs are fine for me. Yeah, I think that's everything. No, I mean, that was in the book. No, I know it was. Yeah. And I was just, thinking it over whether or not I agreed with him. But yeah, personally, I think that I'm more of a suburbs gal. I like the weirdos. I'm not afraid of weirdos, but so I wouldn't say that I like moved to the suburbs to get away from them, but I would say that, I like to have my space from them. There are several short stories written from Oberon's perspective. It's hilarious. Atticus is doing Druid shit, and he's explaining intricate conspiracies about evil squirrels. Oh my god. That's amazing. Actually, Aaron, I don't know if you've read the briefcases that just came out, if you're into Dresden Files, but yeah, you know what I'm talking about. I'm not going to say out loud because in case anybody isn't listening, I don't want to spoil, but there is something of a similar nature, which is pretty like compelling and was one of my favorite parts. Aaron writes, "I know what you mean," in all caps. You know what I'm talking about. But yeah, that was a really good. Briefcases is full of, like, there's one story that I wasn't super into, but mostly it was really good stuff. All right, Aaron. Well, I'm going to sign off, I think. So I'm so happy they gave him a slightly German accent. Yeah, that was weird, right? But thank all you guys so much for listening. If you are listening, thank you again, Aaron, for the commission. I really have been enjoying this book a lot. Hopefully, it's not all on you, because there are a few people in the patrons group who said that they like this series. So somebody else may step in and be able to commission the next five or so chapters. And yeah, I'm just looking forward to getting to read more of this. So thank you again. And I will see you all soon, hopefully, with a few more chapters. Toodaloo, motherfuckers.
That was an Unspoiled Network podcast.